And the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Hello and welcome to the only independent news and opinion program where we chronicle two distinct possibilities, either the demise and possible extinction of the Homo sapien or the greatest leap forward in human history. One thing is certain, though, there is no status quo. Good afternoon and welcome to this once only afternoon edition of the Daily Australian Radio Show, episode number 72 for Tuesday, April the 15th, 2025. My name, as you can see on the screen there, if you're watching, is Jason Olbourne, and right now I'm going to introduce you to my partner in news, her name, Nicola Charles. Nicola, welcome. Happy afternoon.
Happy afternoon to you. Happy afternoon, watchers and listeners. I actually can't read your name or my name on screen because I am both blind and have had 1 hour sleep in the last 48 hours. And it's my fault. It's in the afternoon. I do apologize. I had to fit in. Jason is a busy man with his new show. And also I am a tired woman, but very excited. And I hope you enjoyed yesterday's show. I certainly did. And, lovely comments saying that you guys miss me as well. It's nice when you go away and people say they missed you. So that was cute. I used to get that on Neighbours where people would go, you weren't in today's episode and it was crap. So thank you very much. But I honestly, I was preparing like for only half an hour before we came on air. And one of my citizen journalists sent me a story from Ireland. And I thought, oh God, I've got to mention this because I've kind of heard sniffs about this before in Europe. But you remember that clip that's going around in Australia of that woman who said she couldn't quite work out how she felt about the public knowing if celebrities and such or newsreaders had been told to back particular politicians and they'd been paid for it. You know that clip? I think it was around yesterday or the day before. It's all blurring into one. My brain is somewhere between Singapore and London right now. I've got jet lag. Well, this is a similar thing. So it turns out in Ireland, the government in Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, not part of the UK, they are paying hairdressers to gossip to their clients and convince them that climate change is real. So that this is all what we talk about. They're giving hairdressers backhanders to push their agendas, and it's leaked out. Can you believe that? What kind of fake ass world are we living in, Jason, where literally when you go to the hairdressers and sit down for a trim, you can't even believe what they're saying anymore? It's not just the media and the politicians. It's the bloody hairdressers. What is going on?
Oh, I think it's fabulous. I'm wondering what the term is going to be for a hairdresser involved in propaganda.
An asshole.
It's probably a fair call.
An ex-hairdresser? How's that?
Yeah, an unemployed hairdresser is probably where it's headed. I mean, you go to the hairdresser for a certain, a service, obviously, and people expect that they're going to be involved in a conversation. But I don't know anyone who goes to the hairdresser to get their political news.
No, I mean, my hairdresser's hysterical, to be honest. If she started doing it, talking to me about climate change, I'd know she'd been paid off because I love her to death and she's a brilliant hairdresser. But, she's quite she talks about simple things, let's say. And she's just got this one retort, which freaks me out because they always ask you about your personal life. So if they're not asking you about your personal life and they've gone on to climate change, you'll know, or any other agenda, I suppose. Obviously, Greta Thunberg is too old now for the paedophiles into climate change. She's no good to them anymore. They've moved on to hairdressers. But whenever my hairdresser asks me about my personal life, which she does a lot, like, what have you been doing today and all this kind of stuff? She's only young. She's in her 20s. Whatever I say to my hairdresser, she says the same thing back to me, must be like 600 times per visit. She goes, I love that. What you having for dinner? I tell her, I love that. Do you know what I mean? Oh, you've changed your job. I love that. And I feel like it's like the Jedi mind trick. I'm like, I wonder if she's like, doesn't remember anything I've ever said to her. I don't think she does. But it's like this one retort. And I'm like, please expand your, repertoire to, oh, that's interesting. Oh, how nice.
It's the ultimate answer to say, I'm really not listening to what you're saying. I've just recognized that you've stopped speaking.
I think so. I think so.
Oh,
It's funny though. When you do a show like this as well, right? I'm not saying
yeah.
we think about how we reply, like that's just how we roll, right? Much of it is off the cuff. But to just have one retort to every question, my God, she should go into politics. They're quite dull as well.
There are hairdressers that don't speak. I mean, I've had a few haircuts where the barber just sits there and snip, 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 and you don't say anything, and it's kind of relaxing.
I tip for that. I tip for that. Not
So,
speaking.
so, so that is an
Yeah.
interesting point, isn't it? So, each to their own. But yeah, I don't understand. Maybe the next thing that the government's going to prop up the taxi driving industry by giving them propaganda lines to deliver.
That would be interesting to see the new Australians tackle gender affirming care.
Well, it certainly would be interesting, wouldn't it? I don't know what
Yeah.
kind of conversations you get. I can't tell you the last time I jumped into a taxi or an Uber for that matter. I
A
don't know
new
what to expect.
Australian delivered a piece of post to my home this morning while I was outside having my cigarette and a coffee this morning, trying to remember which planet I actually live on.
Yes.
And he pulled his van virtually right up to my front door, which they don't normally. And he came out and he was a new Australian and he seemed like a lovely chap. And there's a lot of people that live in my house and with different names. My daughter's boyfriend lives with us and that kind of thing. And he's got a big, long Dutch name, quite complicated. So we get a lot of post. And he handed it to me and I said, who for? Because, they make you sign and stuff. And he goes, oh, nobody. And I went, well, nobody lives here, so I'll take it.
There you go. Wonderful. How about that? It's hilarious.
Oh my God, lovely.
What is going on with the world? It just seems to be an odd period. I guess it's the lead up to the Easter break, and everyone's just looking forward to just some time out, and but the world is just spinning on off its axis, if you
Well,
will.
what if we did that, Jason? What if we did that on our side, right? What if every time you got into an Uber or a silver cab or whatever you take, what if the driver said to you, "These chemtrails are terrible today, aren't they?" Because someone on our side have paid off all the cab drivers to push the chemtrail theory. You'd think, "What's going on? That's a bit odd, right? These jabs are no good, are they? They're hurting people."
Well, you
But
know,
if we did it on the other side, we'd probably go to jail.
Well, you know what? You've just described me on every second trip to Aldi for the last 5 years. So, maybe they've got the surveillance cameras there. It's probably the reason why I actually go to the self-serve checkout at Aldi more than in any other shop. Well,
Mm.
not really. I think it's because it's the only self-serve checkout that actually works. So they are painfully slow in there because they talk to everyone as things are coming through the checkout. And if there's two or three deep with a trolley full of goods, it does take a while. So the temptation is to at least use the self-service checkout there. Now, what of course I don't like is that the camera's looking at me and there's a picture of me up on the screen.
That's
However,
why I don't go. Yeah.
However, the thing is, with that little basket of goods, you simply just pass it through. It automatically beeps. You put it straight down there. It doesn't wait for weight. It doesn't wait for anything else. I can be in and out of a self-checkout in Aldi in under 30 seconds, whereas at Coles, I feel like 7 or 8 minutes later, I've been forced in there to work against my will. I feel like I'm a slave.
So we're
Well,
already there. You just put the basket through and everything in it is totted up.
no, it has to still go through one by one.
Oh,
But the point being that at least it works and it's reliable. And if I don't want to deliver any more news to the person behind the counter, if I'm not in the mood for it, yeah, that's the reason why. But I do try and use my public visits to sort of educate and just to test the audience, if you will, like going into the greengrocer and discussing the availability of free range eggs is always interesting to get a comment from the person on the other side of the counter telling me why you can only sell 6 cartons of free range eggs these days. Like they have a limit from their suppliers. And the reasoning I learnt was because they can't afford to replace the chickens at the price they need to, should they be wiped out again with another bird flu
oh.
thing that forces them
Another. There
to
wasn't
cull.
one to start with. My
Well,
God.
the idea that they're concerned. So the whole idea of free range eggs is that there's hardly any supply, and it's to do with the $25 per chicken that they have to pay to bring in new chickens to go through this thing. So that's why there's none left. But yeah, it's an odd scenario at the moment. And then you walk into Aldi and they don't even have caged eggs. And so I can't understand why that supermarket seems to be short of so many goods. I go into an independent little supermarket, a suburb away, and he says, "I've got everything. I don't have a shortage on anything." And so there you go. So
Because
that's
they're
when
not
you
bullshitting you like these big ones. That's why.
and that is a really, really important point, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't trust them. I don't trust them. I find it no problem getting eggs. And if you're lucky enough to live near a Richie's or a Maxi IGA, those they always even though they are not they don't have controlling shareholders, but BlackRock are trying to buy into IGA now as well. But they always source their free range eggs locally. So they've got loads and they don't have limits. And because I know my daughter manages a cafe in the mountains. And obviously, it's a cafe, so it's breakfast and lunch. And so they get through a lot of eggs. The guy who owns it is such an amazing chef. And for a time there, he had to go from store to store to store because he was limited to 2 boxes. So if you run a cafe, that's a disaster. So the owner was spending his entire day running around looking for eggs for the bird flu pandemic. And then worked out just go to Maxi or IGA and you can just buy loads.
And that's the difference. And a plug up from my end, the IG8 North Wyong's a terrific supermarket too, specialises in bulk discounted food. So they're just a very good buyer. And he's always got bulk meat of different varieties and other specials. And he markets that on Facebook. So if you happen to live on the Central Coast, check it out if you don't know already. But it seems to be one of these growing institutions that with these independent supermarkets that create a little niche for themselves and becomes quite popular in different ways. So there you go. That's my community service for the day.
Imagine that, a supermarket or a store that cares about their customers. Like it was only 5 years ago that we lived in a world where we believed they did, down, prices are down. And now we should do a new poster that says up, surveillance is up.
Oh, absolutely. That's it. Very, very good point.
You're all thieves and crooks to us. We're going to watch you.
I often talk about when you have one of these periodic lotto games, whether it be the one before Christmas or Father's Day, and they always seem to be worth $20 million, and sometimes now they're jackpotting all the time. Once it gets over 40 million, 60 million, you're tempted to go and spend a couple of dollars and buy a ticket. And I always describe that the period after you buy a lotto ticket before you lose is that wonderful period.
Oh, it's great.
Where you spend it over and over again.
I know.
And on one occasion, many occasions, I'd say to my wife, look, I have a list now that I'm just going to tell you what it is. But one of the first things I'd like to do if I won a big 40 or $50 million lotto event would be to purchase an independent supermarket, because I feel like that it'd be a wonderful way to model it in what you want to do, but to always be able to provide food for the community in which it serves.
Yeah.
And so there'd be so many things. Then you could sponsor the local teams, etc. But it'd just be a wonderful thing that you could literally run as a not-for-profit, but you could do it in a way that you knew that the community always had somewhere to go. It would be a way to supply jobs, and it would be a way to do it on your own terms independently. So it is one of the things on my list. So if that is a good enough reason for me to win the lotto, well, there you go. I'm putting it out there. But that is signaling intent, Nicola. I would love to be able to do that.
My list is a bit more selfish. It's a 2-story, double brick farmhouse in the middle of so many hectares that I can't even, hear if a bomb goes off at my neighbor's house. Oh, that's it. We're on a list now because I said the word bomb. A garage for the 10 vintage cars, like a Aston Martin Vantage, and all the cool things that I would want to put in there. I actually had this conversation with someone yesterday by phone. But yeah, no, I don't think any of us are going to win. And I used to win a little bit on the lottery. It's the only gambling I do is the lottery. And I buy my tickets for like a month and then, sit around all month going, maybe not, I think, and I only pay cash for them now as well, which is really interesting. Because I think if you pay with your card and you're on a list and AI has your data, which we know they do, they can literally know which numbers you've picked and make sure they don't get chosen. So I buy lottery with cash so they don't know. And that's my advice to everyone, because otherwise they're just not going to let you win, right? We must be. I thought, they told us that blacklists and things like that were for the olden days and that we don't behave like that anymore in a new world of equity and inclusion. But I said the other day in my podcast with a guest I had on, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it still grinds me. And I've said on this show before about China, and they keep slaves and we do business with them, and that's absolutely fine. But, in this country, if you do from I think June or July 2026, if you do a post or even just say something in a room, a supermarket, a mall, that sounds even vaguely Islamophobic, which could be anything. People could just be having a conversation and say, oh, there's too many migrants, and they're taking all the jobs. That's now considered Islamophobic or racist or whatever. You could go to jail for 5 years for that. But what you don't see is China, who keeps Uyghurs as slaves because they're Muslim. They're not Islamophobic. Are Nike Islamophobic because it's made by Muslim slaves? Is Apple Islamophobic because they employ Muslim slaves? No, it's just us. It's like, if you're a corporate, I'm going to incorporate myself, because this entire world means that as a human being, you may not, they keep you jumping from one foot to the next. You've broken a law every time you get in your car, or, some perceived social crime, the wrong pronoun, racist, sexist, homophobic. Yeah, we know we all are. But as a corporation, you can keep slaves just because they're Muslim, and that's not Islamophobic. Isn't that interesting, Jason?
It is very interesting, isn't it? I'm waiting for the Babylon Bee to see how they're going to tackle it, because I feel like satire is the only way that we're going to be able to survive in this crazy, crazy world that we're in. It's like someone played the clip again of Sam Kerr, and when she called the police officer stupid and white. And I'm wondering if everything is just going to become a shade of white in terms of being able to deliver an insult. So if you wanted to attack someone, you'll just have to say, well, you're a dark shade of white, or something like that, or a darker shade of white, or maybe, I'm lighter than white. I don't know where it's going.
We're just being played. We're being played. People need to not buy into this, right? That everyone's now saying, it's this group, it's that group, it's all the governments. You think it's, the CC, and I've gone through these phases myself. You only have to look back at my podcast to see that I was convinced at one point it was all Mossad. I was convinced at another point it was all the CCP. I was convinced at another point it's King Charles III, and I still think he's heavily involved. But really and truly, it's governments who are supposed to be governing, and they're not governing at all. They're a complete joke. And what's interesting is you get a character like Anthony Albanese. He's out there campaigning, right? And what is he doing when he's campaigning? He says, if you vote for me, I'll do X, Y, and Z. You vote for me and I'll give you a tax cut, and I'll do this and I'll do that, and I'll build more houses. But why would we believe you? You were in and you didn't do any great stuff. If you vote for me, you've had the position, right? You didn't do any of this stuff. So the fact that they've got the nerve to go out there and say that, I find quite astonishing, to be honest.
Isn't it funny that you can do 3 years in office, extend the election to almost the last possible date, and yet you have all these tricks up your sleeve that are somehow going to make things better if only you return me to do what I couldn't do for the last 3 years.
Yep.
And then I'm going to criticize your opponent to say that he's incapable of doing it, whilst I'm the one that was incapable of doing it in the first place. And yet to create this two-sided duopoly, this oligopoly of political thought, and then to literally vilify any other opponent using all of the tools at your disposal to make reasons why you should never vote outside the existing regime. Like, why would Albanese, whose biggest threat really is Peter Dutton, put Peter Dutton onto a pedestal and yet slander others the way that he did to Alex Antic recently, and of course to anyone in the third party? The amount of abuse that he's levelled on Senator Ralph Babet is next to, I mean, it's extraordinary. It's almost
probably.
And yet he seemed, I mean, of course, I'm sure Ralph has given plenty back to Albanese, but when you consider, the percentage terms of what's actually at stake here, maybe Albo should just focus on something else. But if anything, he gives Peter Dutton a pretty easy free ride. It's all very,
well, they're the same. They're
friendly.
two sides of a 50-cent coin, aren't they?
Of course they are.
That's what they are.
I'm just surprised at how poorly Dutton is doing. He just seems to be an almost inept opposition leader.
Maybe it's deliberate.
Well, you could argue that, but you tend to think that if you're a leader of the Liberal Party with a belief that you are born to rule, how many chances are you going to get to lead your party? Apart from John Howard, once they're out. They don't get a second chance at leading the party.
But
so
you're assuming they're in that job to lead the Liberal Party, right? But what if someone came along and offered you $1 billion to lose?
well, if that
It
was
happens.
if
It
that
happens
was,
in wrestling, so it definitely happens in politics, Jason.
and that's the point. If it happens in sport and it's found out, that person's tarnished for life. I mean, you look at Hansi Cronje, who the South African cricket captain, who admitted to taking a bribe, and of course Shane Warne sort of was skirted on that area and was lucky enough to sort of evade. But anyone in sport, going back to Shoeless Joe Jackson in baseball, anyone in sport who's tarred with that brush is finished for life. And yet a politician, it seems that if anything, you would therefore understand what's going on. But I just can't imagine that'd be the case with these guys in politics. They just believe that they are the anointed, the chosen ones. What I still can't cope with, the fact is that how so ordinary these major political party leaders are. Like, if Anthony Albanese was to be defeated, there would be there'd be a challenge for who would lead, and it'd be out of Tanya Plibersek and Jim Chalmers.
Oh,
And
isn't she married to a heroin dealer who went to jail?
Well, that was what he was convicted for, but he went on to become the leader of the education department
Isn't he the treasurer of New South Wales as well? He's involved with money, and he was in jail as a heroin dealer. And you're telling me she's there. Okay, another angle to this. What job, Jason, do you think a scheming, corrupt liar like Anthony Albanese would be good for after politics if he doesn't win? What role do you think you might put him in? Because we know that Gladys Berejiklian, who was also corrupt, is now running Optus, and things, let me tell you, have gone very downhill at Optus since she's been around. Which corporation should we bestow Anthony Albanese onto?
Well, I think he'd be looking for a job on the Nuclear Advisory Board, wouldn't you think? To take $1 million a year to say, no, we can't do this. But wouldn't it be a challenge if he had to take the $1 million a year job and he had to promote nuclear? I think that'd be hysterical.
I can't imagine him going on like a speaking tour. A lot of them do that. Bill Clinton does it, Barack Obama, and he's standing out there doing his after dinner speeches, and he's saying, "No, I will not take a question from you. You're not approved media."
Oh, wouldn't it be something to think that Anthony Albanese would put himself onto a speaking circuit in order to be able to live the life that he's been accustomed to doing?
And don't tell me this is me against people with lisps. My son has a lisp. It's just yours I hate, Anthony Albanese, because you're a bloody liar.
Oh, wow. So no love lost here at the Daily Australian, as we're only about 2 weeks away. We're an Easter break in 2 weeks. So it turns out that pre-poll will commence next Tuesday, the 22nd of April, the 2 weeks of pre-poll towards the election. At least it's not a full 2 weeks. You get Monday off, everyone. But that's 9 days of volunteers who need to hand out how to vote cards on
9
the day.
days of fiddling, Jason. That's a long time.
It is. Now, something that was quite interesting today and yesterday. So we had Dr. Chris Neal, who filled in for you nicely yesterday, Nicola.
Thank you, Chris.
In your absence.
Yeah.
Look, he pointed me to the website of People First Party, and now if you go onto that website, you can see their how to vote cards, and what they're asking you to do is to screenshot it and save on the paper, which is interesting, which of course will save on volunteers on the day in your how to vote. So the idea is for 9 days plus election day, you need people out there literally handing you a how to vote card as you walk in. Now, a how to vote card is only a guide, and it doesn't mean anything apart from a guide. So you can vote in any way you want to vote. It's just what their suggested way is in terms of preferences. Should the person you vote for not be defeated? Because in some situations there's 10 candidates running in a particular seat. I saw some yesterday, 12 candidates running in certain seats in Queensland. It's enormous. So that's the idea. But the thing is,
still, the more candidates, the more chance you've got not to include Labor or Liberal.
That is a very good point, and who it is that you put on the bottom. So you'll get these people that say, "Well, who are you going to put last?" And I got surveyed again. It's the third time in this election campaign that I'm receiving these survey calls, and it's coming.
You definitely pay your bills on time. I bet you do jury service too, don't you?
You know what? Once I got asked to do jury service at Parramatta Court, and I went in there, and there was 1,000 of us that arrived, and it took about an hour and a half for them to dilute, and then I was allowed to leave. But luckily, I moved out of that particular area and moved out of Sydney, and haven't been asked to do it again. But
busy court.
It certainly was. But look. thinking back to what we were talking about there with the how to votes, etc., and being surveyed. That's the interesting part, because I could tell it was a Liberal Party survey, and they're quite nervous up here in Paterson because Lawrence Ancliffe, they've dropped at least $1 million on this campaign, as I've talked about multiple times. But on Sportsbet, Meryl Swanson's gone back into the lead at $1.93 to Lawrence Ancliffe at $2.03. But the outlier is Philip Penfold, the independent mayor for Maitland, who's also running as a candidate. So what's really, really interesting here is, should the independents, and there's 10 candidates running for the seat of Paterson this time around, so multiple independents. Trumpet of Patriots is running, a friend and colleague of mine, Peter Arena, is running for the Trumpets, and also...
Any relative to Tina Arena?
In fact, he is. He's a cousin. Yes, that's right. And
she's great.
She's great, and Peter's a great man as well. And he's done a lot of service to the community. He comes from the Port Stephens area. He's in real estate. And what he's trying to do is to consolidate support in terms of preferencing, to see how they can work towards breaking the Labor and Liberal stranglehold on Paterson. So where am I going with this? If you're in the area and you're looking for someone to put your preference to, vote for whoever you want, but you're probably going to be looking at out of Labor, Liberal, and Philip Penfold, the Independent, are the three big chances for the seat.
Oh, look, if you see Independent anywhere and you don't know the person, just vote for them. Just vote for the Independent, because I would rather it be like ancient Greece and everyone is, arguing with each other, and 12 people are for it and 10 people are against it. You're all Independent instead of this wall of Labor and a wall of Liberals and wall of Greens, and Greens are going to back Labour, and we can't live like that anymore. We need independents who have independent thought, because none of these people do. And anyway, what's the point in voting mayors in? The mayor in Whittlesea is about to get ousted by the CEO, and no one voted for the CEO. A single person, no jury trial, no evidence of any crime. But poor old Aidan, he's about to get ousted, likely, just based on spurious rumours and, people within council saying he's homophobic, transphobic, and they're frightened of him. What a strategic way to place minority groups in councils and politics. And we see this everywhere, Jason. You can literally see it on the posters where I live in the southeast. Because then if you ever disagree, or more likely they disagree with you, they get their minority groups to say terrible things about you and you're out of a job.
That, I think, is the big story behind the story of what's happening with Aidan McLinden in Whittlesea. So what we're seeing now is a very deliberate approach to create blur, division, and a strategic approach. So if you've got people who are literally claiming that they've been abused by being asked a question, then you are really taking the piss. And so
I like the way you put that. That's nice and basic. I mean, what about the nearly 5,000 people who voted for him? What will that do? That subversion of their democracy. I mean, it's pointless. You can't do that to voters.
Well, this is it. So what happened in Aidan's case is that he literally, he door knocked the entire ward. So in a council area, there are generally 4 wards, and within them they elect 2 to 3 people in each. And so you're dividing up a small council district into 4 sections. And so therefore, the 5,000 votes he got represented 55% of that particular ward. So he won his position outright without the need for preferencing.
Yep.
So more than half the people outright voted for him on his campaign. And one of them was to just keep safe spaces for children. So in other words, to get the the pride flags and the books and all the readings.
That's why they've gone after him.
Away from kids. Like, you let kids be kids. And this is a very basic thing.
So how awful of him. What a horrible man he is.
That's right. So what does the left do? They call it a form of discrimination, but it's not a form of discrimination. It's an upper and lower limit. It's like saying that hang on a second, all people should be given access to alcohol. And people go, well, that's preposterous. Well, there's a limit. There's an age limit. And
they
so
want debauched behaviour, abusive behaviour to be normalised. It's called normalisation, and it is in itself a form of abuse.
And what I would call it is the new abnormalisation. So and so this is what I say. It's leading with permissiveness, this culture that anything goes. but it's abnormal to allow absolutely anything to go. That's my point. So you wouldn't give a child alcohol. You wouldn't let a child smoke or buy cigarettes. A child's not supposed to be able to get a tattoo without parental approval, or that slippery slope's change. Where we've seen the other day a 7-year-old being tattooed on a leg, for goodness sake. I mean, it just beggars belief. What is the situation in society where parents, let alone society itself, are desperate for children to grow up quicker than they need to or should? I cannot fathom that. I mean, it's one thing that 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds get out there on the left and say, well, you know, they have hormones and they have sexual development or experience or whatever it is, and so they should be allowed to, you know, 12-year-olds have sex with 12-year-olds, for goodness sake, is an argument that's coming out on the left. Again, what is the rush? Why are we in a situation that anything goes? And the same applies in these scenarios. So in Aidan's case, I mean, I'm
that's not what bothers me. That's what I was going to say. The fact that they want this for kids is bad enough. What bothers me is that they would take away Australians' democracy by using that argument, and these people who've been strategically placed, right? This council, Whittlesea Council, quickly with Aidan, I think there's about 1,200 people in total that work there, and on a regular basis, 900 of the 1,200, that's the majority of them, is a high turnover of staff, right? Now, when you do that, it's because something's going on at the top that they don't want anyone getting a whiff of. So as soon as you start to know your job a bit too well, or you develop, God forbid, an opinion, they move you on so you don't have the information. Something very strange is going on up there. Yeah, I heard about that from a third-party source as well, and I thought, you know, I think they're trying to shut him up. I think they're trying to put non-disclosure agreements on him and stuff like that. I think that was after he went on Sky News and was talking about being locked out of the council building by the CEO. I want this CEO named and shamed. Who are you, and what makes you think? Where do you gain your authority to remove Australian democracy? That's what he's doing. She's doing, whoever they are.
Well, you're talking about Craig Lloyd, is the CEO of Whittlesea Council.
Right.
Craig Lloyd, would you believe, was once a Scotland Yard police officer.
I would believe that, yeah.
And what I found strange was watching a video of Craig Lloyd. He had no British accent whatsoever, which I found odd. He's also been involved in police, ambulance and fire emergency services here in Australia. So he's a very interesting character. And he was the CEO of another nearby councils. So these councils have had massive turnover. They've been in all sorts of financial upheaval for some time, and so what's happening is we're seeing these councils become mini kingdoms. And so you see these CEOs that are employed on, say, $400,000 a year, give or take. You've got a mayor that earns $138,000 by comparison, who's elected, and so the CEO is the chief administrator of what is meant to be council policy that's voted on by councillors.
Unelected. And you just said he was at another council, right? So what that tells me is he has proven himself as a good soldier to those pushing the agendas. And so they're like, yep, we'll use you somewhere else. You can do the same thing somewhere else.
And that is the point, isn't it? So the argument now is that Aidan makes very clearly in that Sky News interview is that local council forms the base of the pyramid, and he argues that it's local council that where all the strength lies. Now, most of us, when we get into politics and we follow it, we look at the federal level because you see the Prime Minister as sort of like the leader of the country. And then you look at state level and being a level under, and local government sort of being the area that you want to give up or give way to, but that's where the power lies. Now, what's really interesting is in the and Kate Mason's the expert on this subject when she talks about the managed retreat approach and the 15-minute smart cities, is that what she's explaining is that you'll have a global government that will be the one world global government that technically will be run by AI. But the federal governments around the world will simply become administrators for what will be AI one world government policy. And then what happens at a local level is you'll have a layer of these globalists running at a local level. So state government will be gone because you don't need it. Your open borders will be your federal administrator, and the local councils will become the administrators. So again, you won't have local councillors. So in many ways, what's actually happening now with these CEOs running the show is that this is the de facto plan already operating in place. Now, I
Well,
reckon.
local councils also, by the way, we mentioned the other day, I reported on it. I was contacted again by a whistleblower. They actually, they're the ones who dictate health policy as well. So we were told it was state and federal, and it's this, what was that governing body that ScoMo used to talk about? National Cabinet. They're nothing to do with it. It's local councils, and that's why local councils go into the schools. So if they get a grip on local councils, they do dictate health policy, which we know they want to do and try to do and did do in essence. And now they're also appointing their CEO. I mean, the whole thing is a sham, surely. If we vote for a mayor who earns less than the CEO is making the decision. That makes the mayor essentially like a TV presenter. You go out there and deliver the news, and like a good soldier, you push the agenda, but you're not actually there to think independently or critically yourself, which is a total scam. It's bait and switch. People vote you in based on what you've said when they've seen you speak or an interview they've read in a magazine or online. But then when you get in there, it's not about you or who you are. It's about the CEO, the person we hear nothing about.
You know, the great paradox about local government is that for all the support for Labor and Liberal at federal and state levels and this brainwashing that takes place,
Apparently.
when it comes to a council election, independents always do better than Labor and Liberal. So I would be interested in an experiment, and I haven't done it for myself yet, but to run a dozen independents in every council election in every ward just to see what would happen. Because in the last two council elections here, it always comes down to it that there's nobody that really excites you or that you feel like you can get on side with. But if you could get to a situation that you could flood each ward with a number of independents and flush out the Labor Party, which is, it seems to be the Labor Party is the one with the stronghold, and this is this totalitarianism, this hive-minded approach, you just might be able to break the stranglehold. And then what happens is that a mayor is entitled to be on the appropriate administration that looks into the finances involving the CEO. So that's when it starts to become very interesting.
And wear a wire. Is it legal to wear a wire and be wearing it when they actually bribe you?
Well, how about that? How much is going on here, Nicola? It's very powerful. Look, we are learning at a rate of knots now about how politics works, about what you need to do, about the rise of so many different issues.
It's making our heads hurt, Jason.
It is. I want to make one other quick point because I know I've got to get to the news. But back in my seat of Paterson, there are now 10 candidates running in this election for the seat of Paterson. And last time I think there were 7 or 8 of us. Now, out of the 10, the only person to run again from 2022 is the incumbent Meryl Swanson. So there's a new Liberal. There's a new One Nation. There's a new UAP/Trumpet of Patriots. There's a new Green. There's some new candidates. So there's an extra couple of independents. There's a cannabis candidate. So it is a completely new field. But I don't know who's good. I don't know who's bad. I haven't seen some of these independents anywhere. I don't know who they are, but it's interesting that they would choose to run. But what I'm noticing too is that there's a whole new round of brand new candidates emerging out of the woodwork, and there's some incredible candidates. I mean, Chris Neal just on the show yesterday just has really stood up. There's also
I was a bit disappointed though, because he mentioned loads of independent/freedom parties, and even the big ones who I've not been impressed with lately, One Nation, and he didn't mention the Heart Party, not once. I watched it back, and he didn't mention the Heart Party, which is strange because he's in an alliance with them. So next time, Dr. Chris, don't forget Heart. My husband's running with Heart.
Well,
but yeah,
it's interesting you say that because I know that when I'm in a situation, I'm trying to recall all the parties, which none of us have to do, but that we always forget one. And I reckon that Chris, being a cardiologist, a heart specialist, it's almost like a faux pas to not remember the Heart Party, for goodness sake.
Or no excuse, Jason. Hello.
or no excuse, but I'm not gonna hold that against him just now. I think that we'll cut him some slack. But look, People First are running a number of really good candidates. John Armfield is an Australian Defence Force vet who lost his brother who was in the Air Force to suicide, and he was part of the Royal Commission. He's a very valuable candidate. We're going to try and reach out to him. I noticed the Trumpets are running a fellow called Troy Wozniak, a former NRL rugby league player. I'd be interested to find out what's motivated Troy to put his hand up and run. I noticed that Trumpets have got around 80 candidates, so they didn't quite get to the 150 that they were looking for from last time, but it's certainly a lot better than they were doing only a week or two ago. So full credit to Sue Ellen Wrightson for getting digging deep there and putting in a field. And I noticed that there are a few candidates that ran last time. Rob McMullen, second in the Senate up there in Queensland. He's a very clever guy, wonderful musician as well. But Rob's got some great ideas, and you can look him up on X under the McMullen if you want to.
No, if you've got any hidden talents, you can't go into politics. These people have none.
That's right. So
you're probably no good. You won't wash at all.
No. Well, this is the same for all of us. But look, I do find it fascinating. So any good candidates? Madison King's another one running for People First in WA. We'll reach out again to her as well. There's some really interesting people that are putting their hands up, and it is an approach. And I think this is only the beginning. I think that as we consolidate following the 25 election and start building infrastructure, we'll see even more people wanting to put their hands up and get involved. So it is a process. We all want the magic fix. We may or may not get it, but we all realize that the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Maybe next time round I'll put my hand up and give up my British citizenship. It's not like there's anything to go back to in the UK. The news out of there is absolutely terrifying. And these hairdressers in Ireland talking about climate change, they're just part of it over in Europe. God help us all. Jason, we are so far into the show, I'm starting to see noughts and crosses from my lack of sleep. Should we get onto the news headlines?
Yeah, if we wait any longer, we might have to do tomorrow's news. So let's get into it. Let's get into it for you right now. Peter Dutton will axe free TAFE places if elected Prime Minister, with a Liberal frontbencher telling voters it simply isn't working. Despite 600,000 people taking up free TAFE places since it began in January of 23, just 100,000 people have completed courses. The Coalition's concerns about the scheme are far from secret. They voted against legislation to extend the scheme in the dying days of the last parliament, just before the election was called. Liberal frontbencher Sarah Henderson said in a video that has since surfaced on TikTok that free TAFE policy has cost the country $1.5 billion. Labor campaign spokesman Jason Clare seized on the video as another example of the Liberal Party's planned cuts. I'm not surprised that the same party that cut $30 billion out of public schools is now promising to cut funding for TAFE, he said. This is an example of waste for votes, I would argue, because if only 16% of people are completing courses, what are you doing it for? And when I went to TAFE for a while, that was the biggest thing that the teacher said to us: we must complete courses. This is how we're measured. So the Liberal Party is calling it out. The Labor Party is covering it up. The Finance Minister, Katie Gallagher, has vowed to continue slashing the government's use of consultants, meanwhile, and rebuilding the public service if re-elected, whilst accusing the Coalition of importing a Doge-style agenda from the United States. In an effort to highlight the public service as a key campaign issue, Katie Gallagher said Labor had inherited an agriculture department that was going broke, a bin fire at Home Affairs, a social services department with no internal policy unit, and total disasters in aged care and veterans affairs agencies. Australians are increasingly avoiding travel to the US under Donald Trump's second presidency, according to fresh government data, with forecasters expecting tourist numbers to plummet further throughout the year. Official stats from the US International Trade Administration reveal the number of visitors from Australia in March this year was down by 7% compared to March last year, a reduction of 4,559 people. One would wonder if this is to do with the cost of living. Yeah. The latest Guardian Essential poll shows Labor extending its lead against the Coalition. The two-party plus measure, which allows voters to remain uncommitted, put Labor ahead 50 to 45, with the balance undecided. If undecided voters broke according to expected preference flows, 53% of votes would go to Labor and 47% for the Coalition. This highlighting the ineffectiveness, for me, of Peter Dutton. Now, KRISTI NOEM has come out and said that the reason Real ID is being enforced is because it's a federal law. Real ID is going to just empower the states to make sure we're checking people's residences, their current legal status will be verified. It will allow us to get more information to states so that they can protect their election laws. Here is her in a clip now.
It's amazing what President Trump has already done by closing down the border, making sure we're enforcing our federal laws, doing all we can to identify those that are in this country that don't belong here, that are committing crimes, and we're continuing to enact policies that will give us the chance to do that. You've had quite a bit of discussion on Real ID and its implementation here in the country, and the reason that Real ID is being enforced is because it's a federal law. Joe Biden kicked the can to May 7th, and this Real ID is going to just empower the states to make sure we're checking people's residences. Their current legal status will be verified. We're going to make sure that people who are getting Social Security numbers in this country aren't voting in states. The states have the power and the information to ensure election integrity. And here at the federal level, that information is not going to be any biometric information. It'll just allow people to get an ID that they should be on our planes. They should be people that are United States residencies, and that legal status will be checked. So it'll allow us to get more information to states so that they're making sure that they're protecting their election laws as well.
NVIDIA has just announced it will produce NVIDIA AI supercomputers entirely in the United States for the first time and produce $500 billion of AI infrastructure in the US over the next 4 years. The El Salvadorian President Bukele has said the immigrant from Maryland won't be returned to the United States. The question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to do that. And in other news, the White House has started notifying Congress of a plan to eliminate all public broadcasting funding and codify foreign aid cuts identified by Elon Musk's Doge. Key proposed cuts include $1.1 billion for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which funds PBS and NPR, and $8.3 billion from USAID. Meanwhile, Trump has said to Zelensky, when you start a war, you've got to know you can win the war. You don't start a war against somebody that is 20 times your size and then hope that people give you some missiles. A Florida woman has been arrested for selling human remains on Facebook Marketplace, according to the police. A major solar power plant project that was granted over $1 billion in federal loans will close, with energy experts blasting the project as a boondoggle that harmed the environment. In 2011, the US Department of Energy under President Barack Obama issued $1.6 billion in loan guarantees to finance the Ivanpah Solar Power Facility, a green energy project that consists of 3 solar concentrating thermal power plants in California. It is located at the base of Clark Mountain in the Mojave Desert. The facility was touted by then Secretary of Energy Ernst Moniz as an example of how America is becoming a world leader in solar energy. But after 11 years, the federally funded plant will close in 2026 due to inefficiencies. It's an annual tradition for many families in New South Wales, but prices at this year's Sydney Royal Easter Show have gotten some loyalists offside, and it is a story that could be repeated every year at this time. The shock over the prices at the Easter Show, where families are expected to spend up to $500 to attend. Many were left gobsmacked at how much a day of rides, show bags and country fun costs in 2025, and showgoers shared how much they spent on individual items at the show, including $22 for a cup of gnocchi, $9 for a glass of lemonade, and $20 for a Birdie Beetle show bag that used to be $2. And in other news, Arcturus Therapeutics has announced it has received fast-track designation from the FDA, which is granted to vaccines intended to prevent serious conditions caused by infectious disease. The designation is designed to expedite the development and review process, providing several benefits, including enhanced communication with the FDA and eligibility for prior review, and the possibility of a rolling review. And this relates to development of an H5N1 bird flu injection, utilizing a sa-mRNA-based platform for pandemic influenza vaccine development, offers further options for meeting domestic vaccine manufacturing surge capacity goals. The technology may make vaccines available much sooner than egg and cell-based technologies. The lyophilized vaccine formulation is stable in fridges, thereby simplifying cold chain storing and reducing distribution risks. My comment there is anyone who wants to take a vaccine for a flu, it's entirely on you. Nicola.
I was going to say the same thing, knock yourself out. I'm glad Trump is taking away money from PBS. I used to love PBS when I lived in America with my kids. They had a lot of good kids stuff on there, and it was family fun and wholesome. And I thought, this is great. And then when the engineered pandemic hit, we had Elmo telling kids to vaccinate. And I was like, you scumbags, you scumbags. I won't listen to these, in particular, Australian environmentalists anymore. I don't know if you saw it. I shared it, this visit that Craig Kelly did. Is it the Snowy Mountains? To a massive swathe of between 100 and 200-year-old trees that have just been motored through, like, Sean, like you'd mow your lawn, like no care, no worry about it whatsoever. Doesn't matter about the age, doesn't matter how important they are, to cut through this massive sort of half-mile wide gash that goes on for kilometer after kilometer for the green energy push. So how can you sit there and say to us that this is to save the planet when the process of saving the planet destroys the planet?
It's absolutely the point. And the things that I always look at here is the hypocrisy.
Yeah.
So what they will argue is that the culling of those trees is negligible. So they're going to say, well, it's only a small amount.
I think they feel the same way about human beings. I'll be honest, Jason. That's why this grates on me. It's another, there's an acceptable death rate. This is a phrase that these people use with human beings and with plants and animals. There's an acceptable death rate. There is never an acceptable death rate. If you can't do it the right way while being a true environmentalist, then you're not an environmentalist. You are, in fact, an eco-terrorist. When I saw that scar, I mean, at first it took myself and most people a long time to realize Craig Kelly is actually in the picture in a yellow T-shirt, like a tiny little person next to these amazing trees between 100 and 200 years old. This is clearly environmental terrorism. You could probably see that from the moon. It's so massive.
So they argue negligibility at this point. But during COVID, they were absolutists. You had to inject your child if the child wanted to get near nana, regardless of the long-term effects. They literally put their hands up and said, we dismiss that because right now we're worried about nana. It's always about right now. So whatever they want to do. So this is a war of ideas supported by the propaganda of the mainstream media that brainwashes you to believe what the prevailing thoughts are.
Or hairdressers. Or hairdressers. The problem with agendas is they're just that. They're agendas. They're not democratic. Someone somewhere, usually the people with money, has an agenda, and it's basically my way or the highway. And that's what we're seeing, because we don't agree with the climate catastrophe agenda. We don't agree with the engineered pandemic agenda. We don't agree with the demolition of our economies agenda. We don't agree with the mass migration agenda, but they're all going ahead regardless, Jason.
Well, it just occurs to me, right? Like when I just announced before about there was like 7 candidates in Paterson in 22, and there are now 10 this time around. That's a massive jump. 3 extra candidates over 7 is almost 40% extra candidates. In 2022, there were enough of us that didn't appreciate the tyranny, and that's being polite. But there was still enough that went on with it, but they were still unsure. To add 3 extra candidates to Paterson, and I was looking on the People First Party on their how to votes, and some seats have got 12. I think in Harry Hatzikalymnios' seat of McPherson, there are 12 candidates. Now, to have 12 candidates says to me that there are enough people willing to spend the money to do the hard yards, to knock on the doors, boots on the ground, do all of the hard things to do to become a candidate. You don't just become a candidate just by ticking a box and your name appears on a piece of paper. There's a lot of work that you need to do. So that tells me that there are a lot of people now who realise that there's something desperately wrong, and they've all got their ideas. Now, in the people movement, the third party movement or whatever, we know that this movement is maturing, but the independent movement is something else again. This is another subset of society that we don't necessarily fully understand, that are less organised than we are, and we're a rabble still. So I am interested to see that on election night, Nicola, if there are 12 people in McPherson, how is it going to be possible that they are going to be able to predict preference flows with Labor and Liberal? They will be struggling to get 60% vote between them. So you might be one on, say, 29, one on 31, give or take. But there is no way in the world that these pundits sitting on these tables on election night are going to be able to say, well, the preference flow says that it's going to go such and such. There's too many independents right now that there is no way that you can know who their votes are going for. Now, if they come in at 25, 26% each, we might not know the result of the election for days.
And we shouldn't, because there should be election scrutineers. And I'm sick of it reaching this point where they're sort of halfway there and they go, oh, Liberals called it for Labour or Labour's called it for Liberal. That's handy. Just push us out of the way. We'd like every single one of those votes counted, please. Every last one. I'm sick of this situation where it even happened with Scott Morrison, where people get elected but 1,700 votes and they're running the country. Like, it's absolute madness. You should not be allowed to call an election. What if you call the election because you see the flow of, who knows, maybe Liberal people rock up early, maybe Labour people rock up late. You can't call an election and then call it democracy. That's awful. We're getting towards the end of the show, Jason. I just wanted to mention really quickly about Real ID. I know you think it's an okay thing. I don't think it's an okay thing. I shared on my X account the methods you can use in America, and there are 15 of them. Friends of mine in the United States have contacted state troopers and all various people that are dealing with people who have Real ID. And there are 15 other ways you can identify yourself if you're not comfortable getting it. If you're comfortable getting it, fine. Some people already have it and they didn't even know. Apparently, creepily, it's a yellow star up in the corner of your driver's license. Ew. And that means that you've got Real ID. And I know that during the engineered pandemic, when I renewed my driver's license, a second special number appeared in a different corner of my driver's license. And I thought, oh God, I've been yellow starred because I'm unvaccinated. But just in case anything like that comes along and it becomes biometric, because I have a feeling my banking's about to go biometric. I'm sick of this putting codes in to get into banks, and then you have to go to the banking app to say, is it you? Yes, it's me. Okay, put your code in anyway. So it's like this 4-phase verification. That's bullshit. I'm sick of it. And I know that the next phase is biometric ID. 2 very quick things about that. If your biometric ID, your iris scan or your fingerprint gets hacked, they're you. That was the message from my podcast with Michael Ginsberg the other day. If you get hacked on a biometric digital ID, the hacker becomes you. Get a mortgage, not pay the repayments. Open a business, not pay the tax. And it's you. And good luck going to court for months and months to prove it's not you. The second thing about that is I have actually researched, if you can hear my dogs freaking out, I do apologize. Big day for dogs in my house. I have actually done some research while I was sitting around the last 48 hours. These scans, these iris scans, are actually very bad for you. And they say that the risk of cancer to the eyeball from being scanned is minimal as long as you only get iris scans and eye scans sort of once a year on medical advice. So if we get to the phase where you need to do an iris scan, 10 times a day to get into a supermarket, to get into your banking app and various other things, you're at risk of eye cancer. So be very careful, watchers and listeners, what you're prepared to sign up for. That's my 2 penneth. Everyone asked me to talk about Real ID.
Well, I'm glad that you did. And Kristi Noem, in the clip that we played in the news, said that there'll be no biometric data stored. So that is your line in the sand.
None stored, Jason. Listen to the words. Not none taken, none stored.
Well, either way, you can use your passport for real ID, which is paper, and you can use an enhanced driver's license, which is a driver's license with a yellow star.
Mine frightens people because it's British and it's got the crown on it, and I just go, "Let me over the border, asshole!" So I'm a subject of the Mad King.
Yeah, look, I think it's important to have the debate, and I think that it's also important to understand what they're trying to achieve. However, it does lag from a Biden era policy, and that's what Kristi Noem has said. So it's something that's carrying on and over.
But you could get rid of that. Trump could get rid of that. I'm
Well,
just not. I don't understand why we all have to be ID'd. And I understand that they've brought all these really scary, dangerous migrants into our country, Jason, so that we feel, and Americans would feel, and it's understandable, oh, well, let me separate myself from these scary people who had no background checks. Same in Australia. They were gifted a driver's license, which if you're in California, your California driver's license is the most powerful form of ID you can have. You can't get into certain bars and restaurants without it already. When I lived there, you know, in 2012, so, you know, of course, people are going to want to separate themselves. But again, like Labour and Anthony Albanese putting minority groups into council so they can plead, oh, my God, that person's, you know, transphobic. This is a strategy to bring the migrants in to make us feel like, well, I need to separate myself. I'm a good Brit. I'm a good Australian. I'm a good American. Here, let me get an ID that these, you know, stragglers who came over the border and here on boats can't get. And I smell a rat, Jason. I smell a rat, right? I have lived in a world of scripts for the last 30 years, and this feels like a script. And they can shove it where the sun don't shine. I won't be getting a digital anything. And if that makes me an underclass, then that's what I'll be.
Well, I'll join you. I won't be getting any digital ID, and I don't support digital ID. I just think that this is two things, either a slippery slope or a line in the sand. And I believe my argument's a line in the sand. Now, I like what Clandestine wrote on his page, and he said, I'm never a fan of the government complicating my life even more, but I think this Real ID situation is the gateway to voter ID. Why? Because blue states have been handing out driver's licenses to illegals, so a driver's license is not secure enough to use as a voter ID. A real ID requires confirmation of citizenship and residency, which would serve as a valid and secure form of ID to ensure only US citizens are voting in US elections. My guess is that in the future, everyone will need a real ID or other proof of citizenship in order to vote in US elections, which he says he 100% supports. Those claiming that this is some sort of Orwellian tracking operation or government overreach, I think is preposterous. We are already being tracked every second of the day by our cell phones, cars, devices, etc. Real ID, he argues, is necessary because the Democrats made driver's licenses obtainable by illegals in their states. Real ID is a solution to a problem the Democrats created so they can steal elections. Ultimately, I think the Real ID is about securing elections, hence why the Democrats hate it. And I think that's a little bit of the nuance. So whilst we certainly have our arms, you know, up in arms over it, just like we heard today that the FDA, you know, fast tracking an H5N1 flu vaccine. But I tell you what, if you are given a choice, you will say no, just like you will say no to an H5N1 flu vaccine. It's automatic that you're going to say no. But interestingly, there are people that will say yes and will line up for it. I know people in my own family will line up for it, for goodness sake. They're vaccine addicts. I can't explain it, can't understand it. We come from the same flesh and blood. I don't get it. So
some people are more easily propagandized than others. If you're thinking about that flu jab, by the way, anywhere, any flu jab, any country, go to my X account. I've just posted a picture from a friend on Facebook whose child, a baby, has had something that looks like a flesh-eating bug arrive straight after the flu jab, and it's all over its little face. It looks like a hole, like when you get a skin cancer, like a really bad one that you don't get looked at. Most terrifying thing you'll ever see. But hey, the baby won't get flu.
Yeah, I know. It's just unbelievable to think that that you can weigh these up and think that there's you know, it's an absolutism once again.
Cancer or flu? Cancer or flu? I think I'll go cancer.
I know.
Said nobody ever.
Exactly, and so the only justification is, well, I don't get the flu today, but that might happen in the future. Again, it's this lack of forward thinking, forward planning. So look, there is an unlimited amount of pitfalls. I recorded a very interesting interview with Jerome Corsi earlier, the author and commentator, etc., that's known to President Trump for 40 years. But he did make some very interesting observations about Real ID in terms of whose hands that it falls in, and he also made some interesting observations about artificial intelligence, which he said is itself limited, which I thought was interesting. But there were
hopefully there's my hopium.
Exactly, but certain you know, components here, but he also is talking about, you know, who's right and who's wrong, and he talked about justice, and he's steadfast in his belief that we are going to see justice for the big crimes that are coming. And he says the president is 100% committed to achieving justice, and he said he's just about to publish a paper alongside General Michael Flynn related to this. So there's a guy at the coalface, 80 odd years of age, still writing a book a year. He's like the Clint Eastwood of books. Very, very prolific man. An honour to speak to him. And me too. I think he's the greatest. I have to say, you have to be the most prolific filmmaker, I think, of all time. It's just incredible. In the 90s,
the problem for me, Jason, is that, and not that I'm advocating again for dictatorship, I'm starting to sound like I am, but here's the thing: if a real ID was as an innocuous as it sounds, it would be, and you could trust that it would be, potentially, if you're a Trump guy, and you're a Trump guy, and I was a Trump girl until I stopped trusting everyone. But what do you do then when you've got a real ID and the Democrats get back in? That's my concern.
Well, then wouldn't you want the policy perfected under a Trump administration other than a Democrat?
Yeah, but then they inherit it. That's my concern. We cannot trust the Democrats like we cannot trust Labor and Liberal in Australia.
So if they go down the pathway and say no biometric data stored, then you're going to say, well, no. Then you're going to argue, well, hang on a second. While you're still in power, we want no biometric data collected, and we want that locked up, and now we want that locked up for life. So,
well, I don't want eye cancer from 10 scans a day just so I can move around my own damn country. Do you?
I just can't believe that there'd be no other option, even going down that pathway, that you wouldn't be using something else. I think the whole thing is preposterous. And I totally agree with you that once any of that data is stolen, that's why one of my biggest, not just the invasion of privacy and the absolutism of government having my information, but the fact that once it's stolen, it's useless anyway. The whole system is broken. You steal one digital ID and you create a fraud, the whole system is broken.
The whole system. You know what's better? It was in one of those Alien films. I think it was, Alien, God, Reanimated or something. The ones where they swim underwater. I'm a massive Aliens film fan. But it had that general on a ship out in the middle of nowhere collecting bodies to infect with the aliens. And to get into the doors, the Star Trek doors, those doors, he had to use his breath, right? There was a little hole and he had to go into the hole and it said not detected. And he went into the hole again, and it said, "Thank you, General Perez." Now, that's something you would hope, unless they kidnap you and tie you into the back of a limousine, they wouldn't be able to get your breath. But you see, an online iris scan and a thumbprint, for a start, those thumb and fingerprints could be put at any crime scene at any time, because AI is a bit whip-wappy like that. That's a British phrase, whip-wappy. It can put things anywhere. It could go into a online data crime folder, swap the real ones, put yours in. This is not trustworthy. This is a crime scene waiting to happen. But if you want to get my bad morning breath breathing into a little hole so I can get into a supermarket, I'm happy with that, because no one's got my breath but me.
It's the things that we have to do to negotiate our freedoms. Goodness me, you can have my breath, but you can't have my fingerprint. Look, I don't think any of it is justifiable or justified for mine.
Or needed.
Or
They've
needed.
just proven to us they've let loads of scary people with no background checks in. We can't trust these people. These are the same people who are saying, we need to identify you. Why? You didn't identify the people you've just invited in who are busy raping and pillaging.
Yep. No, absolutely. I still maintain that for mine, it will become from justice, and at the same time, we have to work out a way to become wealthier in what we do as the way forward. Because if we're healthy, and if we're wealthy and financed and educated, then we know where we're going after the system, which is in its final days, and days really mean years, before the great transition, whichever way that's coming. We are really literally living amongst it right now. But there's enough black pill, there's enough bad news, there's enough pitfall, there's enough danger, there's enough disaster. But at the other side, there's something fascinating. And I will say one more thing from the Corsi interview. He talked in a little bit of detail about finance and specifically about XRP.
Shh. Give away our private conversations, Jason.
I'll leave that there. And if you want to make a comment or you want to know what he said, well, you can either come back and ask or you can watch the interview when it comes out. I believe
it's all my husband's fault. He gets me to get in Jason's ear about investments. Yeah, so I think we've sort of laid it out today, our feelings on things, and it's good. I always like that we disagree about lots of things, but I just think one of these wealths that we should have, health is definitely a wealth, and money and investments are definitely a wealth. But one of the big things we need to have is knowledge wealth, right? And that actually, these days, with the internet and even the Wayback Machine, if you realize things are missing, is predominantly free, right? It's not like in the old days where the man knocked on the door and you had to invest in a load of encyclopedias that were probably misrepresenting history. Anyway, I've been watching a lot of history things about wars and all kinds of things during the last couple of days, trying to keep myself awake, and realized that as a history major, most of what I was taught was actually not true. But surprise, surprise, everything is also being fabricated now because, hey, if they can pay hairdressers to get you to believe in climate change, they can do anything. So thanks again for watching the Daily Australian. Thank you for welcoming me back and to listening to myself, Nicola Charles, and my co-host and co-producer, and far more awake than I am, Jason Olbourne, Mr. News himself. This has been fantastic, and it's not Friday this time, we will do this all over again tomorrow.